So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the afternoon session of our public participation forum of the Draft Civil Aviation Regulations 2021. I wish to first of all start by apologizing for starting some 10 minutes late. We were undertaking some technical fix-ups just to ensure that the session goes on as seamless as possible. Now, we are going into the third regulation of the day, which is the Draft Civil Aviation, Aircraft Nationality and Registration Marks Regulations 2021. In the morning, we had two regulations. That's the Draft Civil Aviation Airworthiness Regulations and Draft Civil Aviation Approved Maintenance Organizations. We are really grateful for the input that we have been receiving throughout as we go through the process. I would also wish to remind all of us on the process of logging in from one session to another. Kindly just go to the KCAA page. On the home screen, there is join the public participation forum. Click on the drop-down menu and choose on the session that you wish to participate in. So this afternoon, we will have 3 more presentations being undertaken. That's the Draft Civil Aviation Aircraft Nationality and Registration Mark Regulations, which will be taken through by Ms. Keter, Mary Keter, that is. Then we will have the Draft Civil Aviation Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation Regulations. This is a new regulation. It had received some input when we were doing the 2018 regulations, but was not promulgated. So we will be presenting the same with some additions, just ensuring that the regulations, is aligned with the latest ICAO annexes. Then after that, we will have 2 more regulations. That's the Draft Civil Aviation Certification of Air Navigation Services Providers Regulations 2021 and the Draft Civil Aviation Aeronautical Information Services Regulations. The first of the last 2 will be presented by Mr. David Ondieki, and the last regulation, Aeronautical Information Services, will be presented by our Senior Aeronautical Information Officer, Ms. Caroline Beatty. To move forward, we have received a number of requests touching on the civil aviation, the Draft Civil Aviation Personnel Licensing Regulations. A number of you have been requesting whether this can be redone in light of being the first regulation that we were handling. Some of us might have not been able to give their input on the personnel licensing regulations. We have listened to your request, and we will be scheduling another session for the personnel licensing regulations at a time to be advised on Friday. But in the meantime, I wish to encourage you to send as many questions as possible, or as many comments as possible under the questions tab, or to the dedicated email address, that is kcars2021@kcaa.or.ke. We will receive this request and have prepared accordingly to ensure that we respond to all the comments and proposals that have been received. So to take us through the presentation today, we'll have Ms. Mary Keter taking us through the Draft Civil Aviation Aircraft Nationality and Registration Marks Regulations 2021. She will be assisted by Mr. Julius Nzioka and Alois Lumutu in terms of responding to any of the questions that will be raised under the questions tab. Please also remember that you are requested, in case you wish to make any remarks or in case you wish to give any oral comments or presentations, kindly do so by indicating under the questions tab, and you'll be given the floor to make your responses. Again, I repeat, just type in under the questions tab, indicate that you wish to make an oral presentation, and the floor will be given to you. So let me now hand you over to Ms. Mary Keter to take us through the draft civil aviation, aircraft nationality and registration marks regulations 2021. Ms. Mary Keter. Ms. Mary Keter, please come on board. Okay, our Ms. Mary Keter will be joining us shortly to take us through the aircraft registration and aircraft nationality and registration mark regulations 2021. I wish to remind all of you that the requests that we've been receiving on the personnel licensing regulations will be honored, and we will be able to have a brief presentation on Friday at a time to be advised. As of now, we are still going through the aircraft nationality and registration mark regulations that will be presented by our Ms. Mary Keter. Mary Keter.
Thank you, our moderator, Dennis. This is another good afternoon again that we are able to sit and listen to another presentation on aircraft nationality and registration regulations revised in 2021. I will welcome my team member, that is Mr. Alois Lumutu, to present for us the matrix of changes. And with me is Mr. Nzioka, who is the Manager, Personnel Licensing Kenya Civil Aviation Authority, who will be responding to any queries that we have already received on email from the stakeholders, and those questions that will be streaming in live on the questions pen. So I want to welcome Alois Lumutu to take over and share the matrix with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Manager Yawatenes. This afternoon, we are going to handle, as you have been briefed, we are going to handle proposed regulations on civil aviation, aircraft nationality, and registration marks. I'll very fast go through the highlighted changes on the matrix as I'm shortly displaying. Okay, from the displayed matrix, we have the first part of interpretations, which some of them were missing and some had problems from the previous regulations. Or the first item on the fireproof material, we just rewarded to make some sense, and it reads, fireproof material means a material capable of withstanding heat as well as or better than steel when the dimensions in both cases are appropriate for the specific purpose. So the previous regulation, the word as was omitted, and we have corrected that anomaly. The second item on the helicopter definition, which reads, helicopter means a heavier than air aircraft supported in flight, chiefly by the reactions of the air on one or more power-driven rotors on substantially vertical axis. The previous one was axis instead of access. The next change was on gyroplane. Gyroplane were rewarded to mean a heavier than air aircraft supported in flight by the reactions of the air on one or more rotors which rotate freely on substantially vertical axis. So initially the word supported in was omitted, and we have recorded that anomaly in the proposed regulations. There's a new term that was introduced, was missing in the previous regulations, state of registry. State of registry means the contracting state on whose register an aircraft is entered. Then we have another term, tribunal. Tribunal means the National Civil Aviation Administrative Review Tribunal established under the Act. Previously, we mentioned established under Section 66 of the Act. So we deleted the word Section 66 of, so that in the event the Act changes, we don't need to change this part of the regulation. On Regulation 3.1, a person shall not operate an aircraft as classified in the first schedule to these regulations within or fly over Kenya unless the word civil was missing, because you remember KCA, we only regulate civil aircraft. So we have introduced the word civil, and therefore it reads, a person shall not operate a civil aircraft that is eligible for registration under the laws of Kenya as described in the first schedule of these regulations, unless then there are conditions. Regulation 3.3, a person shall not operate or fly an aircraft unless it bears painted thereon or affixed thereto in the manner required by these regulations the aircraft nationality and the regulation registration marks. You can see there's still the word regulations should be registration. That will be amended. This was amended to the domesticate provisions of Annex to Domestic Law, Annex 7.4.1. Regulation 4.1, an aircraft is eligible for registration if it is. So there was a lack of clarity on this, and therefore we've rewarded to read, either owned or leased by a citizen of Kenya, an individual, citizen of a foreign state who is lawfully admitted for residency in Kenya, a corporation with at least 51% Kenyan shareholder, lawfully organized and doing business under the laws of Kenya, or a government entity of Kenya. So here we have introduced with at least a corporation with at least 51% Kenyan shareholder. This is to prevent full ownership of a corporation with all foreigners. Regulation 5, we have improved on clarity on 5.1, and we have deleted the word aircraft appearing after authority as it is misplaced. So we have rewarded, and it reads, a person who wishes to register an aircraft in Kenya shall submit an application for aircraft registration to the authority for registration on a form specified by the authority, and each application shall A, satisfy the requirements of Regulation 4, and B, show evidence identifying ownership. So here we have introduced the word satisfy the requirements of sub-regulation 4. And we also introduced C, the form to be signed in a manner specified by the authority. We have removed the word prescribed as it appears in the earlier regulation. The word signed in ink has also been removed. Now Regulation 5.3.1 is new. We have introduced this regulation to comply with applicable standards contained in the ICAO Annex 8, Part 2, Chapter 2.3.4, and ICAO Document 9760, Chapter 6. The introduction is, there is an export certificate of airworthiness or similarly titled document from the previous state of registry. We have used or similar type of document to take care of those states that don't issue a document that is called export certificate of airworthiness. We have also introduced Regulation 5.3 Part M, and which we have introduced any other specified requirements by the authority. So you may bring a list of requirements, but the authority may require any other document or any other requirement. We have also introduced subrogation 4 to become 5.4, which is introduced to comply with applicable standard. It reads, application for aircraft registration and issuing a certificate of registration shall follow airworthiness certification process specified by the authority. Okay, we also introduced in Regulation 6, we have introduced Sub-Regulation 2, which is introduced to comply with applicable standard contained in ICAO Annex 7, Chapter 7. It reads, the authority shall maintain an aircraft registry showing for each aircraft registered in Kenya the information recorded on the certificate of registration and any other information required by the authority. We have also introduced Sub-Regulation 3, which is introduced to comply with applicable standard contained in ICAO Annex 7, Chapter 7, and it reads, upon request, the authority will provide information to ICAO or to other ICAO contracting states as to aircraft registration and or ownership of any particular aircraft registered in Kenya. Regulation 7.1, the authority shall furnish the person or persons in whose name or names the aircraft is registered in this regulation referred to as the registered owner a certificate of registration as set out in the second schedule, which shall include the particular specified Regulation 6 and the date on which the certificate was issued. For this, we have made an amendment to provide for the language in which the C of R, the certificate of registration, is to be issued. We have introduced the word, the C of R should be issued in English. On Regulation 12, there was lack of clarity, 12A1, and therefore we have reworded and read, and it reads, the marks shall be located once on the lower surface of the left wing structure of the aircraft, unless they extend across the whole of the lower surface of the wing structure so far as is possible. The marks shall be located equidistant from the leading and trailing edges of the wings. The tops of the letters and the numbers shall be towards the leading edge of the wing. This one has been rewarded to comply with applicable standard contained in the ICAO Annex 7. In Regulation 13.1, we're also having a lack of clarity in the current regulation, and we proposed a rewarding to read, a person shall not operate an aircraft unless the aircraft is marked with letters and numbers of equal height for each separate group of mark. This amendment is to capture applicable standard contained in ICAO Annex 7. Regulation 13.2, from the current regulation, there was a word missing, the word character, and now it is proposed to read the width of the character except the letter I and the number 1, and the length of a hyphen shall be 2/3 the height of a character. This is rewarded for clarity. Regulation 13 also is rewarded for clarity, rewarded to a single statement, and we have combined A and B, and therefore Part 3, Part B will be deleted by this amendment, and now reads, the characters and hyphens shall be formed by solid lines and shall be of color contrasting clearly with the background, and thickness of the lines shall be 1/6 of the height of a character. So we have combined the previous A and B to become one statement. Regulation 13.5, the previous regulation is, we are missing the word height, and therefore once we insert height, it reads, in the case of lighter than air aircraft, other than unmanned free balloons, the height of the marks shall be at least 50 centimeters. Previously, it was reading length, so we have changed the length to height. Regulation 13.8, subregulation D, or Regulation 13.8D was rewarded to meet the requirements of standards Annex 7, Chapter 5.1.3 and 5.2.3 to read, if the aircraft does not possess parts corresponding to those mentioned in marks are too small to accommodate in subregulation 8A, B, and C, or if the parts are too small to accommodate the marks, the measurements of the marks shall be determined by the authority, taking into account the need for the aircraft to be identified readily. This is a provision to be utilized by those operating small aircrafts that may not meet the requirements of the above mentioned sizes of marks. We have introduced subregulation 11 new. This is introduced to make provision for special cases for size and marks introduced on subregulation 1311 to cater for special cases for sizes and marks as required by Annex 7, Chapter 5.1.3 and 5.2.3. And it reads, the authority may allow special cases for size and locations of nationality and registration marks if A, if either one of the surfaces authorized for displaying required marks is large enough for display of marks meeting the size requirements of this section and the other is not, the full size marks shall be placed on the larger surface. B, if neither surface is large enough for full size marks, the authority may approve mark as large as practical for display on the larger of the two surfaces. And C, if because of the aircraft configuration, it is not possible to mark the aircraft in accordance with this part, the owner may apply to the authority for approval of location and size. Regulation 14, this was renumbering for clarity and deletion of hyphen as characters. And it reads, a person shall not operate an aircraft unless the aircraft is marked with 1. Capital letters in Roman characters without ornamentation. 2. Numbers shall be Arabic numbers without ornamentation. Regulation 17, there was a typo where the regulation does not address applicable standards contained in ICAO Annex 7.9.1. And now with amendments, it reads, the owner shall affix to each aircraft registered under these regulations an identification plate, A, inscribed with the aircraft type, model, serial number, nationality, and registration marks. And on Regulation 21, we have introduced a new regulation because of lack of timelines and conditions before replacement of C of R, that is Certificate of Registration. And now the Regulation 21.2 has been introduced to read, the authority may issue a replacement of Certificate of Registration upon lapse of 30 days from the date of gazettement of the loss or destruction. This is including a requirement for gazettement for an issue of certificate of replacement of registration. Regulation 27.3 is amended to fit legislative language, and it was reading, meteorological pilot balloons used exclusively for meteorological purposes or unmanned free balloons without a payload shall be exempt from the provisions of these regulations except as otherwise expressly provided. It is amended to read, these regulations shall not apply to meteorological pilot balloons used exclusively for meteorological purposes or unmanned free balloons without a payload. And those are the amendments that have been proposed to the Civil Aviation Aircraft Nationality and Registration Marks. I now take you back to the moderator, Bwana Dennis.
Thank you very much, Alois, for taking us through the aircraft nationality and registration mark regulations 2021. Indeed, this is one of the regulations that has not undergone through a lot of changes. We've not received much input on it. And as evidenced from the matrix that has been presented, we have received few comments on this particular piece of regulation. I'm reminding you that in case you intend to be given the floor to make any remarks or give your input or submit any comments, you're invited to do so by indicating the same under the questions tab. We will be giving you the floor. I wish to request any of the presenters on the stage right now, if there is any additional input that we might have received through the KCAS 2021 email, kindly indicate so that we can give you an opportunity to take us through the comments that we have received so far through KCAS 2021.
Thank you, Dennis, for another opportunity. I want to confirm that we have received a comment that is from Evans Kamau Kihara and Paul Njoroge from Kenya Airways, especially with regard to regulation number 5 of nationality and registration mark regulations, where the regulation requirement, as cited in the comment, is that an application for aircraft registration and issuing a certificate of registration shall follow a airworthiness certification process specified by the authority. There is a proposed amendment by the two stakeholders that they propose that we maintain the current separation where the aircraft is registered and then certificate of airworthiness follow. This is to allow any required maintenance to be carried out in Kenya. This will create work for Kenyan AMOs. This will make it easy for the Kenyan AOCs to acquire aircraft. Agreed. I think as is in our regulation number 5, sub-regulation number 4, that is referenced here, is that we still maintain the separation, that every aircraft must first be entered into the Kenyan register after meeting the requirements, and then after, then the CAA will issue a certificate of airworthiness. Maybe from your proposal, we are also picking something that may have been ambiguous in this statement, where we have written that a certificate of registration shall follow airworthiness certification process. This statement we picked from ICAO Doc 9760, but we will relook at it as a team to ensure that this ambiguity is resolved, so that what we meant by saying it shall follow is that following is registration will be done only after compliance with a particular certification process that will have been specified by the authority. So when we say airworthiness certification process, it doesn't mean that it is a certificate of airworthiness. It is like an airworthiness department certification process. So we will clarify this working together with our legal team to make sure that the language is done properly for understanding. I think so far that is the only email that we received from that is Mr. Kihara Evans and Mr. Paul Njoroge of Kenya Airways. Online, I haven't seen any questions coming in. I will take this back to the moderator, Dennis. Maybe something can come up, and we are here on standby to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Ms. Mary Keter, for taking us through the comments that we have received so far. As mentioned, we did receive a few input on this particular regulation, and we are requesting for any additional comments that might be there with regard to the aircraft nationality, aircraft registration and nationality marks regulations. We are requesting for any input on this particular regulation. From the comment section, I've not seen any so far. we are still waiting for any input on this particular piece of regulation. Kindly feel so to give your input. As we wait for any additional input that might come in during this session of the aircraft nationality and registration marks regulations, I'd like to remind our participants that you can request for the floor to make remarks on the regulation that has been presented or any of the other regulations that might have already received comments in earlier sessions. This will enable us collate all the comments that we have received to date and present them in a tabular format. Kindly please be advised that this will not be the last session that we are interacting with you as our stakeholders. We will, after collating all the input and comments, will give you an opportunity to show you the final draft that is incorporating any of your comments. I mean, incorporating the comments that we have received. Those that have been taken on board will be reflected accordingly. And those ones that might not have been taken on board, reasons will be given and you will have an opportunity to interact more so as to understand exactly where the authority is coming from. So we are still waiting for any comments or input that we might receive from the stakeholders in terms of the regulations, in terms of the regulation that has just been presented. Feel free to indicate so under the Ask a New Question tab, and you will be given the floor to make your presentation. Please note also that we have listened to the request for undertaking review of the personnel licensing regulations. As you can remember, this was the very first regulation that was presented. We have received comments and input in terms of requests to be given an additional opportunity for purposes of receiving comments on this particular regulation. We are reviewing the same, and a time will be communicated in terms of when we will have the process on the personnel licensing regulations repeated on Friday. We will communicate the time as to when the personnel licensing regulations will be presented once more, and an opportunity given to the public to ensure that we receive all your comments. In the meantime, please feel free to send us an email or your written comments to kcas2021 at kcaa.or.ke. In case of anyone who wishes to make oral presentations, kindly feel so by indicating under the questions tab. I can see there is a request by Anyango Otieno to get the floor. I have sent the participation request. Kindly accept, and you will have the floor for purposes of giving your presentation. As we do that, there is also a comment from Bwana Douglas Karoki. Can the process of registering the aircraft into the Kenyan register be defined in a flowchart as guidance material? I think this is a very positive input from Bwana Douglas Karoki. This can be done, but I'll give an opportunity to my panelists who are here with me to give or to respond to that. In the meantime, I'm requesting Anyango Otieno to join us and take the floor for purposes of giving us your input. Kindly accept the participation request and you will have the floor to give your input. Anyango Otieno. Karibu, the floor is yours. Anyango Otieno, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, please proceed. You have the floor.
Okay. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Yeah. So my question, I had only one question on this. The registration. It's almost similar to Douglas Karoki's question, but okay. Uh, in the AMO regulations, we had these are class A4 aircraft, kind of aircrafts. That is light sport aircrafts, home built kit planes, which in the airworthiness regulations, they were given a special kind of certificate of airworthiness. With regards to the registration, what will the registration marks? How are they issued out for such planes? And at the same time, uh, these aircrafts, do they also require do you require to follow the same process as registering? For example, registering an aircraft that is not within the registry requires training, two KCA airworthiness inspectors on that aircraft. Does this still apply for kit planes as you are registering kit planes? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question on the registration process of aircraft that are not currently, I believe what you meant was they do not have manufacturer specifications. Is that
Yes,
it?
yes.
Good.
Aircraft
Okay.
that do not have type certificate.
Type certificate. Okay, that's very well noted. Thank you very much for your question. We will have one of our panelists respond to that particular question. And also Bwana Douglas Karoki for your proposal on having a flowchart showing the registration process as guidance material. That is very well received. There is also an additional request that's from Maureen Nyaga. The proposal is it possible to make the aircraft register more accessible? For example, having it on the KCAA website. Well, that's a very good proposal at KCA. We are continuously trying to ensure as much transparency as possible. This is something that can be looked at, and it's a very good proposal. I'll request one of our panelists who's currently come on the floor for purposes of giving feedback on the questions that we have received so far. So, okay, we'll have one of our panelists come on board and respond to the questions that have been raised, as well as give remarks on the proposals that have been raised. I think they are quite progressive, and it will actually work to the benefit of the industry and the CA in terms of moving forward. So, Ms. Mary Keter, kindly take the floor.
Yeah, thank you again, Dennis. I am going to respond to a question by Anyango Otieno on especially the aircraft that are non-type certificated and the registration process. You realize that in the new proposed regulations 2021, regulation number 5, sub-regulation 4, we have introduced the statements that we just discussed about a certification process. This way, we wanted an enabling regulation to allow the authority to be able to register non-type certificated aircraft and give it a certification process with guidance material that we have already developed and we are reviewing them now, so that the requirements that normally are asked during normal aircraft registration will be able to be separated from the normal aircraft that is type certificated and that which is non-type certificated. One of the questions that you've asked is about training for this aircraft, especially when it is new on the Kenyan register. We have always put these requirements together with the type certificated aircraft, but with the new process coming in, we will actually be able to speak about training for those home built or amateur aircraft, so that there is a separation, whereby when it is a minimum requirement that training should be carried out for the type certificated aircraft, then how are we going to handle training for these non-type certificated aircraft? So this, Anyango, we have considered, and thank you for that input. While we do our technical guidance materials, we will for sure be very explicit on this one. And then the other question that has been asked by Douglas Karoki is, can the process of registering the aircraft into the Kenyan register be defined in a flowchart as a guidance material? Yes, we have done this, Mr. Karoki, and for sure we will share this with you in form of an advisory circular, which currently exists as Airworthiness 001. We will amend to include the chart which we have already developed in-house. So this is possible. Then we have Maureen Nyaga. Is it possible to make the aircraft register more accessible, e.g. having it on the website? Yes, Maureen. This is actually a requirement by IQ, and we are actually polishing our register now to make sure that we share with the public when the time comes, but we will also try to make it sooner. This one is a good input for us to effect. Then we have again Anyango Otieno. Please display the matrix of changes used in this session on aircraft registration again so that I can download it. Thank you. That's a request by Anyango. It's already done. And I believe Mr. Anyango can see what we have displayed. Okay, thank you. Dennis can take the floor.
So thank you very much, Ms. Keter, for the comments that, for the feedback given to the comments received so far. And as indicated earlier on, we at KCA are continuously looking at ways of ensuring that there is transparency in terms of the information that we have, and we will share the same as and when available, while still at the same time ensuring adequate privacy is provided as required by various other laws. So we'll still have the floor open. We have some time before we move into the next regulation. We still have some time open to receive more comments and more input from our stakeholders on the regulation that has just been presented, which is the draft Civil Aviation, Aircraft Nationality and Registration Marks Regulations 2018. Please feel free to indicate under the Ask a New Question tab for the floor in case you intend to make any oral presentations during this public participation forum. As we do that, kindly be reminded that we have listened to the request to undertake review of the draft Civil Aviation Personnel Licensing Regulation 2021. The same will be presented at a time to be advised on Friday in the course of the day. So you are still encouraged to send as many questions as possible or many comments as possible to the dedicated KCAA email address for this particular exercise, which is KCAS 2021 at kcaa.or.ke. We will collate all your input and comments and present them in a tabular format. Thereafter, we will be able to at least present the final version showing the comments that have been taken on board, as well as the comments that may have been left out or taken with amendments on board, so that thereafter we can have a document that will enable us work side by side as had been indicated by the Director General or the representative of the Director General during the opening of this session. We welcome any questions or any comments and input on the draft civil aviation, aircraft nationality, and registration mark regulations. As we continue to receive input and comments, you are kindly reminded that in case you need to or you wish to make any oral presentations, kindly do so by indicating under the Ask a New Question tab, and the floor will be given to you for purposes of making your oral presentation. You are encouraged also to share any comments or input that you might have, not just on the aircraft nationality, the aircraft nationality and registration mark regulations, but any of the other regulations that might have been presented to date. That's on Monday and yesterday. We are still receiving your comments and input. You're encouraged to give your written submissions so that the same can be reviewed and incorporated in the draft regulations as early as possible. Thereafter, we will have an opportunity to share with you the final draft of the regulation so that you can see how your comments and input were were incorporated in the draft regulations that we are about to submit to the ministry for purposes of promulgation. I think earlier on in the forum, there had been an observation that during the promulgation of the 2018 regulations, an opportunity was not availed to the stakeholders to review the comments that they had given to the general public. We intend to ensure that during the review of the 2021 regulations, adequate opportunity is given to interrogate the final drafts that have been presented, that will be presented to the ministry for purposes of promulgation. So you can rest assured that any of the comments received, you will be able to see how they have been transposed or adopted into the draft civil aviation 2021 regulations. Please, we continue awaiting any input or comments on the aircraft nationality and registration mark regulations or any other regulation that has been presented to this point. You can see there are some comments coming in. It's on ambiguity. There's also a comment there by Anyango Otieno on I hope we'll have an opportunity to give feedback on the registration of non-type certified aircraft. Okay. This is an untapped area where aviation enthusiasts who are experts, professional in aviation can take part. Guidance material on this should be enabling. See, you've already been answered. Yes, Nyango, you will have an opportunity to give feedback. And also on the non-type certified aircraft, we will be working closely with the industry to ensure that the regulations that are developed or any guidance that is that the authority comes up with receives adequate input from the stakeholders, especially on these non-type certified aircraft operations. So I'll be requesting our panelists, if any, who can respond to Bwana Patrick Auma for on regulation 2621.
Thank you, Patrick, for your input on that particular regulation 26.2. This is specifically on aeronautical user fees, where the authority requires that before an application is entertained, that the fees shall be paid. So maybe the word of the use of word entertained and your suggestion to use attended is good to be shared with our legal department so that we can all agree what word is good for this regulation, because this word actually has been there since time immemorial, repeated in 2007, 2013, 2018. Now in 2021, we did not actually review it, but it's something good to think about as a team. We will let you know what the members agree at KCAA. Thank you. Then Anyango Otieno, you say that I hope we'll have an opportunity to give feedback on the registration of non-type certificated aircraft. Yes, for sure you will have an opportunity, because currently KCAA and some operators of these non-type certificated aircrafts are engaging. We will make you aware of the times and the dates these deliberations would be going on, and we invite you so that you can also be part of the team that comes up with these advisory circulars that will be approved and shared with the industry for implementation, to support the implementation of these new regulations. Thank you. Okay, back to our moderator, Dennis.
Okay, thank you very much, Mary, for the comments and input. As evidenced, we intend to ensure that we receive your comments and incorporate the same in our regulations as we move forward. Still waiting for any of the input that might be received on this particular regulation that we have been discussing, the Aircraft Nationality and Registration Marks Regulations 2021. In case of any request for the floor, please feel free to indicate under the Ask a New Question tab, and the floor will be given to you. Once again, I wish to remind all of us that due to the request that has been received on the draft civil aviation personnel licensing regulations, we have listened to the requests, and we will be communicating on the timing of the same, but the same will be presented again on Friday at a time to be advised, and we will be able to receive additional comments, as well as you can seek clarifications on any of the provisions contained therein. During the various regulations that have been presented, especially on AMO, quite a number of personnel licensing issues were addressed, and we appreciate the same. We encourage you to continue sending input to the dedicated email address, which is kcas2021@kcaa.or.ke. KCAS is KCARS 2021@kcaa.or.ke. So now we have not received additional input or comments on this from the questions tab. We encourage you to send over at we encourage you to send any comments that you might have to KCAS 2021 at kcaa.or.ke. So at this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, kindly allow me to request for 10 minutes break. We meet back at 3:15 for purposes of going into the next regulation that we are reviewing, which is the draft civil aviation carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation regulations 2021. This we will be This will be taken through by our Chief Meteorological Inspector, that's Mr. Winston Geshero. Probably just before we leave, I'd like to give the floor to one of our panelists to give some remarks. Bwana Julius Nzioka, our Manager Personnel Licensing, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Moderator Dennis Kimani. And before we close this session, this emphasis on Regulation 4, Subregulation 1A, where there's some emphasis on the requirements as far as eligibility is concerned. Kindly take note about the 51% requirements as a shareholder for a business that is lawfully organized and doing business under the laws of Kenya or a government entity of Kenya. That is very important for us. We stress just look into that regulation and the changes that have been introduced. And generally, we don't have any major changes that have taken place as far as nationality registration marks of aircraft are concerned. There are a few changes that, of course, we have gone through. And we need to stress and say all inputs from the stakeholders have been taken into consideration. And the other thing is we take this opportunity to thank everybody, all participants who have contributed and have been with us in this forum for presentation of these draft regulations this afternoon. And we ask all of us to continue giving inputs, comments, concerns, suggestions. We are going to continue receiving them as much as possible so that we have a better and safer aviation industry in Kenya. Thank you, the panelists and everybody else who has been listening to us. And thank you very much all. We wish to break from this point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bwana Julius Nzioka. I trust that this is the provision that you are drawing our attention to, which is on the eligibility for purposes of ownership of an aircraft in Kenya. Please, we continue receiving your input and comments during the subsequent sessions, or please feel free to communicate the same at KCAS 2021 at kcaa.or.ke. So we'll take the 10 minutes break and rejoin here for purposes of going through the civil aviation, carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation regulations, popularly known as COSIA. Thank you very much and see you after the break.